Welcome to the 89th CPR CSH workshop. Today, my colleagues from the CSH are all in France, and unfortunately not here. So, and especially during question time, if there's people behind me, please let me know it in case you'd like to ask something. So today we're very happy to welcome Ashwati Anand, Ajay Srivatsan and Persis Taraporwala to speak on what does an Indian smart city look like. Persis has been, I'm especially happy because Persis has been with us at CPR now for some time, and we don't often do talks by in-house presenters, but at this time, given the kind of obvious interest in the subject and the fact that they have been working on this issue for some time, I was happy to have been able to persuade them to present. Ashwati and Ajay have been with us for the past few months as part of, they've just finished their fellowships at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements, and will be Ashwati has been trained as an architect, Ajay has been trained as a journalist, and they'll be going on to different parts of their careers shortly. And it's always, it was very nice having them over, and it's always nice when something collaborative actually leads to something that can provide the basis for future work, which I think at the end of this talk you will all agree with me we have. So it's been now roughly about 2 years, as the minister recently also issued a statement on the second year anniversary of the Smart City mission. And yet, at some point in time, we are not still very clear about what that smart city is. This is not necessarily for the lack of the fact that people have not tried to explain in various ways what it is, but we also have not perhaps paid systematic attention to what it is that is embodied as part of what is actually happening on the ground. And today's talk will focus on looking at how exactly are the cities that have been selected to be part of the Smart Cities mission, what exactly are they doing as part of this mission or the project? And then out of that, presumably will come an idea of smart is what smart does, and in that sense, what is the Indian city doing is something that we hope to learn over the next hour or so. So with those words, about 45 to 50 minutes for the presentation, and then open questions, substantive questions until after the talk, and clarificatory questions during, I think, is what the speakers tell me will be entertained. So, floor is all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Partho, for introducing us, and to CPR CSH for having all of us here. We've been roughly working on this collection of the data for about 3-4 months now, and what we wanted to present was basically an empirical understanding of what a smart city in India looks like. There is quite a lot of work on smart cities in India. However, because the data was still not out there, a lot of it was speculative, and it tends to move between one of two ideas. One, that they will sort of solve the problems of urban development in India, and to the point where the other extreme is that they will destroy the democratic structures which with which we govern our cities. So, keeping in mind that we have a lot of information on these ideas and the speculation around them, we thought that would be interesting to see what does a smart city look like. So, you can go to the next slide. So, we asked basically, where does the smart city lie? The smart city is part of a stronger move towards looking at urban development and providing funds for urban development. While there have been older policies, the JNNURM is the first primary large-scale project which talks about urban development. And currently the Smart City Mission is in this sort of a trinity of the Smart City Mission, the Amrut and Hriday. And each of them have a different objective in mind. So your Smart City Mission is to push forward for innovative ideas and to work on sort of compact areas that can work as a lighthouse to inspire change both within those smart cities and in other cities as well. Amrut is a take on from the JNNURM model, which was to look at basic infrastructure and services, and Hriday was identified to sort of help with heritage conservation. So they each have different roles to play, but if you were to look at the finances, the Smart City Mission supports 100 cities, and it has a central government outlay of 48,000 crore. The Amrut has a central government outlay of 50,000 rupees, but it supports 500 cities. In total, between Amrut, Hriday and Smart Cities, they have about 509 cities that they take care of. So we just wanted this understanding that when we talk about the fact that there is going to be innovative practice or that there's going to be this smart city, it isn't one policy in itself, but it's part of a larger network. So we asked a very basic question, which is, what is a smart city? And to that, there wasn't a very clear answer, because the government's exact answer was, the answer is there is no universally accepted definition of a smart city. It means different things to different people. The conceptualization of a smart city therefore varies from city to city and country to country, depending on the level of development, willingness to change and reform resources and aspirations of the city residents. A smart city would have a different connotation in India than, say, Europe. Even in India, there is not one way of defining a smart city. So we try to understand what the mission hopes its cities will achieve, and this was a little bit more helpful. It says to promote cities that provide core infrastructure and give a decent quality of life to its citizens, a clean and sustainable environment, and an application of smart solutions that focus on sustainable and inclusive development. And the idea is to look at compact areas, create a replicable model which will act as a lighthouse to other aspiring cities. So from this, we took away a few keywords. So you had lighthouse or a replicable model, you had core infrastructure, quality of life, sustainable environment, sustainable development, and inclusive development. You can go to the next slide. So this brings us to what is the objective of this study. And what we want to do is, as we said before, provide that empirical understanding of what the smart city looks like, and to just question the idea of the lighthouse. Is the smart city mission, is the objective of the smart city mission replicable? And so these led us to the following research questions, which is, what governs the smart city mission in each city? What form of citizen engagement was recorded in the proposals? How are smart cities financed? And what projects were sanctioned under the smart city mission? So just to break that down a little bit, so the smart city mission in each city will have a municipality, and that municipality is functional, but in order to implement and to route the finances, a special purpose vehicle will be created. And so one of the arguments that has been put forth is that, is there going to be an ambiguity between the structure and powers of the special purpose vehicle and the municipality? So we just wanted to have an understanding of who is in the SPV, what form of citizen engagement. So one of the very strong components of legitimizing the smart city mission was that it was a movement away from top-down planning and urban development, and it was one where you actually went to the citizens, and it was a bottom-up, innovative, very, very people-centered policy. So what we went through was trying to understand what kind of citizen engagement did you undertake in order to sort of legitimize the kind of proposal that came out of it. And then the questions 3 and 4 are interlinked. So what kind of projects do you have in place in the 60 cities, and what projects were sanctioned, and where does the money come from? Yeah. So methodology.
So the methodology and the limitations of our study were, so as Percy said, for the empirical understanding of smart cities, we kind of tried to look at the study in 4 parts. One was the SPV, to understand the governance. The second was the participation of the citizen engagement within the smart city mission. And then we clubbed together the projects and the finances. For each of them, we had a specific set of methodologies. For the SPV, the databases that we kind of used was the information provided on the Smart City Government website. They had put up whatever data that they have on the SPVs that are created and formed. And apart from that, we also refer to the municipal acts to understand how the SPV was formed and how the representations within the SPV is taken into care. So, and then we were disaggregating the data to understand the executive members who would come within the SPV, the form of the SPV structure at the various levels of representation, that is at the center, the state and the municipal level, and if the executive of the board of directors within it are elected or non-elected, and how much is a private representation within the SPV in the form of independent members who are within the board. The limitations for this study were that we only took into account the cities which provided data in English. The language was a limitation here. Secondly, for participation. So for participation, there was recorded data that the smart city proposals and annexures provided for us in the form of citizen engagements that they have recorded. So we took the data at face value and recorded it into 2 forms of understanding the citizen outreach that they had done and the feedback that they had conducted, they had received, and the various methods and means that they had used for it. For projects and finances, we had so we looked at the various databases, the data sources here. You have the smart city proposals, the annexures, and there are project details of each of those cities that they have provided. Now the issues that you can see, so we categorized our cities into 4 categories. You had cities which were detailed. There were 34 cities which provided all kind of detailed information about their project and finances out of the 60 cities. There were 15 medium level cities, which means that they had overall PAN and ABD breakdown of the finances, but nothing in terms of each of the projects that they have listed and how the finances are split. There were 7 cities which kind of had annexures and proposals but did not speak at all about their finances, and there were 4 cities which did not have the annexures at all. So because they were corrupted and could not be available to us.
We just will move a little bit into the Smart City Mission and how it's functioning. So the Smart City Mission had essentially two processes that cities had to go through. The first round, as they called it, happened when the central government asked the state governments to provide them with cities that they thought could be eligible for the Smart City Mission. So in 2014, June 25th, this is when the mission was launched, and states were given 2 forms. The forms had a variety of details that they had to fill in, and each municipality had to fill in a lot of their budgetary details. So have they done audits of their budgets? Do they have, what is the sort of income that they have? What is the kind of property taxes they collect? How successful have they been in implementing prior projects and policies? And there was an evaluation for all of this, of which about 60% had to do with the financial health of that municipality. This form had to be sent from the municipality to the state government, and from that the state government would choose which would be the cities eligible that they thought were eligible and would go to the central government. So on August 27th, when the central government provided 98 cities, a list of 98 cities, these were all accumulated from the information that the state governments gave them. After that, the cities had to provide proposals, and then it came to the second round where your proposal would be vetted to see if it would be accepted. Now, at the point at which this took place, before the first of these rounds, so there have been to date essentially 4 sub-rounds, there were only 98 cities. And so since the Smart City Mission was supposed to have about 100 cities, it was assumed that every city which was nominated and made it to the list would be part of the Smart City Mission. It just meant that they would make it either in the first or the second or the third cut. However, this sort of changes over a period of time. When the first round of cities are released, that's on January 28, 2016, there are 20 cities which are accepted. Now, these go into the first, this is called round 1, and it's just important to remember these rounds, because when we'll be breaking up the information later on, it's just interesting to remember that there was round 1, then there was fast track, which were 13 cities that were selected in May 2016, and round 2, in which 27 cities were selected. These 3 consolidate 60 cities, which is what this study looks at. On June 24, 2017, 30 new cities were declared. So these are not part of this study at this point in time, because those proposals have not been made available as yet. What's interesting is that in round 2 and before round 3, certain cities were added to these rounds which were not part of the initial 98. So right now you have about 109 cities vying for the 100 cities. And so there are apparently, according to the central government, 20 cities left, of which only 10 will get a spot. So I bring this into the story only because there is a component to the smart city which has been put forth as both its strength and its weakness, and that is its ambiguity. So there is no clear definition of what a smart city is. There is no way of knowing whether the rules can change. And it's a component within this story. So just as an overview of the data that we have, the Smart City mission has a budget of about 15.08 billion rupees. And the forms of implementation of the Smart City mission are basically area-based development and Pan City. Area-based development is basically what the Smart City mission discussed as a compact area. So within a larger city, a component is chosen and that part is focused upon. And the Pan City gets another component of it. As per our data, we see that about 80% goes to the ABD and about 20% goes to Pan City on an average across cities. And if you were to look, even if you break it up according to rounds, so whether you look at total round 1, fast track, or round 2, it stays somewhat within that range. It's in the ABD and Pan City is also interesting because when the smart cities were launched, the smart city idea came up with the NDA, with the BJP manifesto, which said 100 new cities would be created. By the time we had the budget announced, it became 100 greenfield cities. But when the first draft came about, greenfield kind of went into the background. And we also see this in our data, that not many cities which have a greenfield component are part of the smart city mission. So there is this ability to change. Next. So again, so if you want to look at the range of budgets, between the 60 cities, you have things which are under 1,000 crore and over 5,000 crore. And if you remember the first slide, the budget allocation for the Smart City mission is 500 crore from the central government, 500 crore from the state or ULB for each city, and the rest has to be sort of got either through convergence from other schemes or from the through PPP or through CSR. Some cities are also looking at municipal bonds and looking at the sort of privatization of financial structures. On an average, so if you look at the line that goes through it, an average a budget is about 2,000 odd crore. And if we go back to our average of the ABD, which is about 80%, over 1700 crore goes to one particular area of every city. So when we're talking about replicability, this is just one thought that we like to keep in mind, that we're talking about a budget which is sometimes fairly close to the municipal budgets of the cities themselves for a particular area. So when we're talking about replicability, can we keep that sort of a thought in mind? Yeah. This is just a similar graph. So that's the average spent on ABDs in general, and with the average spent in each city for just the ABD. Yeah. We broke up the proposals by both area and by budget size. If you look at the budget size, most of the proposals are within the range of 1,000 to 1,099 crore and 2,000 to 2,999 crore. And if you look at the area, most of them are within the area of 100 to 199 square kilometers, and the average line that you see there is the average area of the ABD. So the smaller the city, the larger is the proportion of the ABD. So the ABD for cities which are under 50 square kilometers is about almost 14%, whereas when you go to above 300 square kilometers, you're only about 1% of the entire city. This is interesting because when data is put out about why the city is, so the argument is sometimes put forth that the cities are elite, the smart cities will be elite, and they're only facing a particular component. And there are times when some data is cherry picked, and there are statements like a recent press release stated that no, the cities are not elitist, because sometimes the cities have an ABD which could be, say, 33% of the entire city. But at that point, it would be interesting to see whether it is what proportion of cities have that. And on average, we found that the ABD is about 3% of the entire area of the city. So when we're analyzing data on the smart cities and we're sort of looking at pictures and seeing what we want to see, we find that on that scale of when we want to see this, the ABD or the smart city mission being as completely useful, we go towards the fact that, you know, there is a 33% kind of an ABD. But if you want to show that it isn't useful at all, then we go towards the, oh look, it's only 1% of the city, and it might be useful to just have a holistic understanding of what the numbers really are.
So moving on to governance, we were trying to look at how, so the Smart City Mission talks about forming a SPV, which is a special purpose vehicle, which would be the governing body for the developments that the Smart City Mission entails for that particular city. Now, the SPVs are limited companies which will be formed under the Companies Act 2013. So what the guidelines say are that the SPV formed would have, it will have the shares such as 50-50 of center or state ULB or 40-40. But what they actually want to have is that they're also open to private shareholdings within an SPV. Of course, the majority being with the state ULB or with the government. If you can look at the data that we got, out of the 60 cities, 59 cities have formed SPVs, because one of the guidelines or one of the criteria in the mission was that the money will be disbursed into the city only on the formation of an SPV, so which was prerequisite. So except for Newtown, Kolkata, every other city has an SPV. But within those 59, only 35 cities had the proportions of the seats that they're filling. Like, how is their representation broken down into? Like, who is their chairman, the CEO, and the board of directors? Now, if you can look at, so can you move on to the, no. Go up. Yeah, just this one. So if you look at how the SPV is structured, so you have the chairman, you have a CEO, you have a board of directors, and you have some independent directors. So the chairman, so whatever 35 cities have filled in, at the moment, how they're broken up, as you can see, is the representation. You have 56% of the representation across the 35 cities is through state level officers. Then you have 19% is what you get for municipal representation, and followed by 10% for center. What we call here as private is basically independent representation, such as project management consultancy people or architectural associates. And unknowns would be probably the independent directors that are mentioned within the SPV at the moment are not clarified. They're just called as urban experts, something we don't know where would they fit in or from where they are. At the moment, out of the 35, you really don't see any private company representation within or shareholdings within these SPVs. If you go down. So if you just, this is the breakdown of the 35 cities that we've listed, how you can see it is. So Agartala has 80% of its representation as state. Just go down. So you can see the red is the state representation, how across cities it's majority state. And the state representation is generally like the municipal commissioner, or you have state level nominees, you have Ministry of Urban Affairs, Urban Development, Administration, local self-government. Yeah, go down. So now within the center, state and municipal, we try to see how much are elected and non-elected. So how much is which are the, so as you can see, only in municipal representation did you even have an elected being, which is your mayor or your standing committee chairmen. There wasn't any ward councillors listed in the representations of the 35 cities. The state and center are all civil servants, which again across the cities you can see most of the cities have just civil servants, which are appointed officers of the government, and no form of city municipal elected representatives. Solapur is probably the city which has a decent size political or an elected representation with their mayor, its opposition and standing committee, current standing committee representation. That's it. Go down to the slide. Go next. So moving on to citizen engagement, the proposals and the annexures give the proposals for a city to be selected give a lot of weightage for citizen engagement should be recorded when they're submitting the proposals. They say that you need at least 16% weightage is given for it to be ranked once you submit the proposal. So out of the 60 cities, 4 being corrupted data, we did not even have those data. They look at citizen engagement in 2 forms, as outreach and feedback. Outreach, and even in outreach and feedback, they break it into direct and social media. Direct is when they have one-on-one or some kind of number of people that they've corresponded with, which could be through any kind of consultations. Social media here is any of their impressions, likes, and how have they reached out to people. So if you can see, out of the 56 cities, only 40 cities recorded. So what we have done is we've taken the numbers on face value of whatever they've provided at these many number of people we've reached out to. So we've tried to understand how many cities actually responded. So the 40 cities who gave some kind of data on direct outreach that they have, and out of which, if you see the percentage of within the population of that city, 20% of that city has actually given an outreach, so it has a direct outreach from that last column. Similarly, in direct feedback, only out of the 56 cities, 24 cities gave back a feedback. So 24 cities recorded the feedback that was given back to them. And if you see the population of that city, you will average, these are both averages, so you have 18.16% as an average of the population of that city, of those cities. Similar, yeah, I don't know, 1 second. So, and in social media, because we couldn't understand, like we couldn't take down, we couldn't count the number of, how do we divide with the number of the population. What I can tell you is that out of this 56 cities, 22 cities had some kind of social media outreach, and 39 cities say that they got back a feedback of some kind. Which actually also shows us that how inclusive was your participation. So we are also talking about what was the quality of participation that you recorded. You had, the numbers cannot really say anything about how much did you reach, but yeah, was it thin or was it properly, you did not record it, but even the quality matters.
Was that why we kind of broke up the participation into direct, so either surveys or what, or they could have had Natak Nukkad. They had a whole range of things. They could direct included both surveys, Natak Nukkad, went to school, had a discussion at an educational institution, a whole bunch of things. But what we had were only numbers that were recorded. So that's why you'll see a discrepancy. Somehow, like in the social media component, 39 cities have recorded how much of social media responses they have, whereas only 22 recorded how many people they reached out to. So how can the feedback be more than the outreach? And that is because they did not actually document the outreach well. What we left out of the outreach, what we counted as outreach and what we counted as feedback was the feedback was only where you actually gave your opinion somewhere. So you either replied to something on a website, a poll, you retweeted it, even you put it on Facebook, any sort of thing where you had an active engagement with it. We did not put in so Twitter and Facebook and social media have this concept of impressions, which is the number of people you could have potentially reached out to. A lot of the proposals put that as interaction, and that is problematic because you don't know if people actually saw it. So that part was not included, and which is why it seems like there are lesser cities who do outreach as compared to the number of cities that get responses. And what also interested us is that there were 10 cities which had no feedback. So out of that, 4 were corrupted, but that means 6 cities were chosen from the current 60, which did not record any sort of feedback from people. They said we reached out to people, but they didn't have feedback. So when you're talking about citizen engagement, when you're giving it a very large component of marking, 16 points out of 100, as Ashwati mentioned, on what basis are you doing it? Do impressions cut it? Is it the potential that you may have reached someone online if enough when you're making decisions this big?
So we'll move on to the exact projects that they're going to fund with some detail actually. I'm not sure if everybody knows, but Delhi is one of the smart cities, so we can even look at what exactly is going to happen in Delhi. But just before I go there, I want to signpost a couple of things. One is a lot of money is going into these small areas, which are neighborhood size in all these 60 cities. And the nature of the participation which decided what the project will be implemented in that small area of the city is questionable at best. So before I get into the projects, I just want to get a sense from all of you just to check the divergence between what your aspirations are and what is really going to happen. What do you think an ideal smart city should have? And we'll actually discuss what exactly is there. So I just want to get a sense of what you think should, because Delhi is one. Like what would you like to see in Delhi? Yeah, New Delhi is one of them. Yeah. So like any just responses on what do you think money should be spent on to call a city a smart city?
One wonders whether we need a smart city. We need a caring city which takes care of its people. Which
Okay.
is inclusive.
Okay.
Where is inclusion in this? We want to know that.
Okay. No, but not abstract. Like I'm spending money on a particular project or infrastructure. What would you like that money to be spent on? There is money. There is 1,000 crore, assume. What would you spend it on if you want to call a city a smart city?
Urban infrastructure.
Like, could you?
Water supply, sewage,
Okay.
drainage, waste disposal.
Water supply? Can you just repeat that?
Water supply,
Yeah.
sewage disposal,
Okay.
drainage,
Okay.
waste management,
Okay.
transportation, parking,
Okay.
social infrastructure, schools, and the skill development,
Okay.
and the other hospitals,
Okay. Anyone else?
cultural activities.
Okay. Stadiums. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Okay.
Two more things, employment and housing.
Okay.
Yeah, so since you have only 1,000 crores, I would rather focus on the human resources in the city
Okay.
and make that smart.
So how would you do that? Build colleges or like?
No. I mean the governance.
Okay. So
Governance,
training for municipal officers.
capacity
Okay.
building and all that,
Okay.
and data management of the city.
Okay.
Invest 1,000 crores in that, probably you might get returns.
Okay.
So, in infrastructure.
Anyone else? Of what? Okay.
Last mile connectivity, public transportation.
Public transportation?
Last mile connectivity.
Last mile connectivity.
Self-employment opportunities.
Okay. We can take a couple more. It's a long list already. Monitoring the regulatory. Okay, some monitoring mechanism. Yeah.
Creating public realms, recreational spaces and heritage zone, which as a city I feel Delhi has potential but hasn't focused much.
Heritage zone. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Basic services for all. Okay. Yeah. We'll get into that. Yeah. Anyone else?
I think my city would be smarter if it is accessible smartly to everyone or everywhere.
So,
Accessibility should be provided
in terms, yeah.
based on in terms of transportation and other even disability. One of the important components like disability.
Okay.
Some funding for the plan preparation as well. So
Okay.
just bring together all these things, some part of funding.
Yeah. Just one more, please. Sorry.
One of the basic problems is improving accountability of the government officials. That's one of the most critical things. You
How
can,
do you?
you
I'm
can.
talking about project. What do you spend the money on?
Yeah, so that itself is a project. There's no one to listen. That's common for so many problems.
Okay.
So
Okay. Some kind of accountability mechanism. Okay. Yeah.
Since you mentioned quality of life was one of the parameters
Yeah.
in the beginning, perhaps parameters for better quality of life, which obviously include all of the things that people are talking about: air, water, food,
Sure.
which being the basic things, and then of course
Okay.
equality.
Okay, so that's a lot of feedback. I'm not not sure if we can cover all of it, but we'll touch upon a couple of them. So I'll just walk you through what we did, and I will talk about all of these points that everybody raised, and what exactly you will see, and whether you will be happy about it, you can tell me later. So first, we did an analysis, just a word analysis. There are 2,850 projects across these 60 cities, just based on the frequency of appearance of certain words. So the bigger the word and the redder it is, the more often it appeared in terms of frequency in those 2,850 project descriptions that these cities had given to the center for their selection. So obviously smart is a huge word. Interestingly, there is water. A lot of cities are spending money on water. A couple of things that I think you should notice. Parking is quite a big component, and it's bigger than bus. There is a lot of money going into waste. Solar is a big spending item. SCADA, control systems, those are all things that they're going to spend money on. Toilets, mostly through the Swachh Bharat Mission urban component. There's a lot of money in traffic and heritage. So this is just a word analysis. So this is not weighted according to the money. This is only the frequency of occurrence of these words. So we'll go into the overall financials now on how the money is going to be spent and where it's going. So this is a basic flow diagram of it's okay, of where the money is coming from and where it's going. So there are a lot of options for these cities. Bond, one city is considering, maybe more. There are some central and state government schemes from which so the size of these bars correspond to the amount of money. There is some loan component from the Asian Development Bank. There is Jain and Yoram's ongoing scheme. A lot of money from PPP, CSR, Smart City, which is 48,000 crore that Persis initially talked about. There's some money from state government grants, from the ULB's own budget, annual budgets, and little money from users who will possibly pay based on water meters and electricity meters and things like that probably. So I split that into three components: government, private, and SEM. So a couple of things, interesting things that you can notice. These bars are also based on the size of the budget. So if you hover over it, you will get the size of the budget. So if you look at Chandigarh, for example, which has one of the biggest budgets, 5,982 crore over the next 5 years, a lot of money is coming from private sources. So if you look at some of the biggest cities, it's all violet. Here, Indore, for example, Jabalpur. So a lot of cities which are going to spend a lot of money over the next 5 years, if they do implement what they claim they are going to implement, A lot of that money is going to come from private sources, mostly PPP. So one question is whether they will actually raise this money. They claim they are going to raise this money, but are these PPP projects actually going to take off? That's one question. Yeah. This data is from the smart city proposals that each city sent, saying we are going to spend money on these things. Give us the money. And yeah, yeah, yeah. So they have given a split of where the money is going to come from. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. yeah. No, these are not projections. These are the things that the cities have clipped. So they basically listed a set of projects, right? And they have to tell where they are going to raise that money from.
It's like an MOU, right?
It's not an MOU. It's a proposal. Yeah.
So for the smart city mission, in order for you to be selected as a smart city, you had to provide a proposal which had a main body, which was a more general understanding, and you had an annexure which was more detailed. And so the annexures have all the projects. So that's where initially, when in the methodology, when Ashwati referred to, we had 4 which were corrupted. So this, those 4, we got our understanding of their projects through the project details, which is the 3rd document. So in the initial slideshow, there were 3 documents. One is proposals, the annexures, and project details. So these kind of complemented each other, and that's where we come up with this database of 2,800 projects, and across 60 cities. That is, we should have actually had a little image of, maybe you can open the Excel sheet later,
Yeah.
but it would basically, what we have is what rank is the city, which city, what state, which round did it get did it get selected in, what is the, and then we look at the category of whether it is an ABD or a PAN under which this project will come in. And then we look at what is the category. Is it water, is it transport, or whatever? And then you have then other underwater, it may be metering, it may be water supply, it may be wastewater, whatever other things there may be underneath it. And then you have the source of finance. And now the source of finance are basically on the left hand side what you see here. So in some places you had information across this, in some places you didn't have it. So this is from the projects stating that it will come from here.
The closest thing that it will come to is like a budget. Imagine it as a budget. I'm saying I'm going to spend these things on these many projects, and this is where the money is going to come from. It's essentially like that. Yeah. Sure. No. Right. Right.
From our calculations, the smart city mission of the total budget, only 19% of the projects completely over the ABD and the PAN have an IT or an ICT component. A majority of the projects do not have this component, and as the first sort of definition said, and we'll be coming to the sort of more global definitions of what smart cities are, because they are sort of based in the idea of big data and ICT and sort of, like you were talking about, the value add and efficiency, basically building efficiency. The Indian model does not specify that you need to have that.
That there is a value added to the technology.
No, it is what your city and your people decide is smart. And so that is why we're sort of just trying to break down and he will come to that in the next slide, which is just explaining what kind of projects are coming up.
Just one other thing that yeah, sorry.
If you have finished, then I want to raise a couple of questions.
No. We'll come back to that later then. So a couple of other things that I want you to notice is there are some cities also like Solapur, which do have a significant government component, possibly from the state government. The state government is giving some grant. So if you see the pink lines, those are the government funds. But essentially the most important thing in this visualization is that there are some of the cities that are going to spend the most amount of money or claim to be going to spend the most amount of money. A lot of it is going to be private sources. And it's questionable whether they'll actually be able to raise it or they've just put it in their proposal. So next thing that we'll move on to is the individual projects. So this gives you a sense of where the money is going. So in the previous one, you saw where the money is coming from and going to each of the cities. This is the overall project cost, the 1 lakh. So it's all in crore. This is 1 lakh. Can you see it? It's 1,29,045 crore across 60 cities. This one, the orange bar on top. And everything below it is split based on the categories that the money is going to be spent in. So if you add up all these boxes, you will get that number. So the boxes are sized according to the amount of money that is going into that particular sector. So a couple of interesting things based on your feedback on what you want the money to be spent on. So there are some components in there like water, waste. There is water here. Sanitation has a lot of solid waste management. There is transport. Transport is the biggest component actually, but we'll come into like what is inside that transport. There are sports facilities, like very little money, but there is sports. Capacity building is there, but it's too tiny to show up here. Heritage is somewhere here. Yeah, heritage is here. There is some IT spending somewhere here, yeah, IT spending. So a couple of things that were mentioned, schools and hospitals. Health is quite tiny, about 1,206 crore out of the 1.29 lakh crore is going to health. Education is too tiny to even register. It's somewhere here. I can go in actually. So this 561 crore is education. So it's being spent on things like government, schools, smart education, which would probably involve like some kind of computer-aided training inside classrooms. There is an urban planning and management institute, which probably more cities should think about. There is some library spending, but essentially this is 561 crore out of 1.29 lakh crore. So the heading is too big to register. So if you hover over it, so these are the actual project names that were given in the proposal. So every box is one project here. So if you hover over it, because the name is too big, it doesn't show up on the screen, but if you hover over it, you'll get it. So if I go back up, transport. So some people said money should be spent on transport. So if you see the biggest components, it's roads, which includes flyovers, bridges, grade separators. There is a huge component on parking also. A lot of multi-level car parks are being built in many of these cities. So compared to those two, public transit is smaller. There is some money spent on NMT and pedestrian infrastructure, traffic. A lot of cities are getting smart signals. So public transit is interesting because a lot of the money is not actually going into building buses. It's going into buying buses. It's going into building smart bus shelters, CCTVs inside buses, installing GPS in buses. So the total number of buses that will be bought under the Smart Cities mission across the 60 cities is around 300. So just to give a comparison, JNNURM, I think sanctioned was about 25,000 buses. They bought a little over 10,000 buses. But under Smart Cities, you will buy around 300 buses. And interestingly, all of them are electric, which I think is smart. Sorry? So all the buses that will be bought under Smart Cities are electric buses. No diesel buses are going to be bought. Housing is also interesting. So if I go in, there are a couple of cities which are building townships, so that's kind of skewing the data a bit. There is a lot of EWS housing. There is real estate sale, which is going to cross-subsidize the EWS housing. There is slum redevelopment. I don't know whether this is interesting or not, but there is some money on hostels and dormitories and rental housing. Very little, but there is some money. So rental housing has about 57 crore out of the housing budget of 16,342 crore across 60 cities. So one more thing that I'll show and we'll move on, which is water. A lot of money is going into supply. About 8,265 crore is going to be spent on these 60 cities. A lot of it is on metering, which is one thing that we have been wondering about. Like, if you're spending this much money on metering, are you actually going to raise money through it? Are you going to charge premium charges for water? Because this is about 2,300 crore. That's a significant amount of money into a narrow section of the city. All of this is going into ABD. None of it is in the PAN component. Yeah. These are mostly household connections, and yeah, this is civic water supply. Yeah. municipal water supply.
I want to ask a question. Where
Yeah.
the water, for example, Chennai
Yeah.
has gone to 50% of the supply.
Right.
Bangalore has got 0%.
You mean in terms of coverage?
Where is it going to come from?
Okay.
I mean, it's good to put money there, but
Right. We will come back to that later. Yeah. That's a good question. Thanks. What else? There is some money on capacity building, like I mentioned, on schools, on stadiums, on hospitals, but they are all substantially tiny in comparison to the overall size of the budget. In economy, there is some skill development component. You can actually, there is some stuff like office space, exhibition center, hotels, but there is also some money on skill development, skill building labs, which are in economy, and incubation centers for startups. Okay. Yeah, there is. Mostly parks, lake redevelopment, urban parks, construction of barrages. A lot of money is also being spent on greening certain corridors along roads, but mostly on lakes, kind of fixing certain lakes which are polluted. And also a lot of money on riverfront development, interestingly. I don't know whether it's the Sabarmati model that they're looking at, but a lot of cities are thinking of riverfront development, and it's one of the components that kind of you see replicated across many cities. There are also air pollution sensors, air pollution monitors, which are part of ecology, and they are often being put up along with smart poles along streets. So these smart poles are supposed to have some video kind of facility, which will give you some information about traffic up ahead. There are air quality monitoring sensors on it. There are solar panels which power the street lights. So they call it smart poles. A lot of cities are spending money on these things called smart poles, which have multiple uses. And air quality sensors are going to be installed on those poles. Measurement. There will be sensors which will measure the air quality in that particular location. Well, yeah. I'm just telling you what's there. Yeah. Yeah, there is money that's going into rainwater harvesting, which is inside water. You can see. It's actually 627 crore out of 8,265 that is being spent on water. Some money is also going to recycling. And in many government buildings, actually, they're trying to set up some recycling plants and things like that. So we'll move on to, so this is across all 60 cities and across this includes every rupee that is going to be spent across cities. But this doesn't give you a sense of which city is spending money on what. We'll move on to that. No, not that I know of. So this basically gives you a sense of, so these are cities at the bottom which are being ranked, which are being ordered according to their rank. So Bhubaneswar, which is on the leftmost corner, is rank 1, and Vadodara, which is on the rightmost corner, is rank 60 in the Smart City Mission ranking scheme. So a couple of things that you can, so I'm going to split this by category in just a minute, so you can see certain categories and how they rank is, so there was a competition to be part of the Smart Cities mission, and there are, like Persis talked about, there were rounds. So in the first round, 20 cities were selected, so that will be rank 1 to rank 20. So out of this 100 cities were ranked based on their capability to implement Smart City mission. So presumably rank 1 is the best city according to the central government's definition, which is Bhubaneswar. Yeah. So before I split this into category, one thing that you can notice, so this has only 5 categories. I've split this, and these 5 categories actually account for 61% of the money that is going to be spent, which is a substantial sum, and is kind of reflective of the overall. So if you look from the leftmost corner to the rightmost corner, you can see a decline in the bar, the size of the bar. The size of the bar is the amount of money. What that means is cities are becoming conservative, which is quite interesting, on the amount of money that they can spend. And even more interestingly, a lot more of the money is going into ABD across rounds. So if you compare rank 1 and rank 60 is more likely to have more money spent on ABD than rank 1. which could mean two things. One, they're realizing that raising finance is hard, so let's be conservative. And raising finance within a smaller area of the city is easier. So let's put more money into the ABD area. This is just a conjecture. This has to be tested, but that's probably what it shows, except for the outlier, which is Thane, which is developing a township, so it's kind of an outlier. But if you see the general trend, the amount of money that is being spent from 1 to 60 is dropping slowly. So if I split this by category, it will show you 5 categories, which are the most dominant categories in which the money is going to be spent: economy, energy, housing, transport, and water. So there are these interesting spikes, if you notice. Chandigarh particularly, which has a huge spike in economy, and pretty much no other city is spending money on economy. And that's because in Sector 52, they're putting up like a hotel, a retail establishment, some entertainment zone. So these are all part of the Smart Cities mission. And they're spending about 4,000 crore on these slew of 2 or 3 projects, which are very mega projects. Housing, you can see, so the point of doing it, doing all of the stuff that we've done is, for example, if you're in future interested in housing projects in SCM, you can immediately spot the 5 cities that you should do field work in, which are these spikes. In many cases, they are townships, they're EWS housing, but you will know which city is spending a lot of money on housing. Transport, a lot of cities are spending money, which is the biggest component. A lot of cities are also spending money on water. Water seems to be one of the universal spending categories. A lot of cities across the board are spending money on water. Energy, much of it is solar. I didn't show you the breakdown. Much of the money is going to solar, into metering, smart metering. I forget the others. But it's dominantly solar and metering. Yeah. Yeah, they are zero. There are some zero expenses in water. There is no expense on water. You're asking why? I have no idea, but some cities aren't spending. You're saying every city should spend money on water? Okay. Right. I don't know, but this is based on what they have said that they're going to spend money on, and some cities aren't spending money on. Yeah. So just to end it, since there has been a lot of data, I thought I'll talk a little bit about like other models that exist out there, because we're talking about smart cities in general, and it kind of involves my own personal interest in the smart cities mission, which is when I was in 2013, I was a graduate student in Chicago. I know it's kind of a diversion, but you will understand the relevance as I go along. I was a graduate student in Chicago, and I briefly worked as a reporter. And one of the biggest political stories in Chicago at that time was this thing called the TIF, which is a financing instrument, which is kind of relevant to what we're talking about, to finance urban renewal projects. And TIF essentially is, it means tax increment financing, where you carve out a small zone of the city, and you say that a lot of the money that is going to come into this area from property tax, from other sources over the next 25 years is going to go into a separate fund, which will be invested only into that small area of the city. This was one of the ways to finance, because this is a smaller area, and they will involve private players a lot, which will get into agreements with the city, and they will be able to finance, and their incentive is that property tax rates would go up, because the area would also become more vibrant and things like that. So the political corruption angle of this is, in many cases, the aldermen, who are the councillors in Chicago, chose these TIFs based on where they live, so that the property rates go up. And the other thing is, the companies which entered into agreements with the city to implement these projects spend the TIF fund money on things like just redeveloping their own property. For example, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which was inside one of the TIFs, which is right in the heart of the city, spent money on things like gyms and pools, and they legitimized it, saying tourists are going to come to our facility, and it will kind of lead to more economic activity. But the reason why it's connected to the Smart City mission, I feel, is because Chicago is a heavily segregated city. It's one of the most highly segregated cities in the world, and there are these regions of prosperity and blight. And these TIFs are often located, obviously, because it's linked to tax on places which relatively do better. And there is a history to it because before that there was a federal government scheme which redlined zones in Chicago based on race, and only certain parts of the city would get central money, federal money, for housing and mortgaging and things like that. So if you think about it, like this TIF was preceded by a federal scheme which created zones of the city which were better off than the others, which allowed those areas to pull off from the rest of the city and make them more conducive and viable for financing financial instruments like the TIF. So the point about financing when it comes to Smart Cities mission, and it's interesting that some of the cities in their cash flow statements say TIF flow. So right now it's going to come from water user charges, probably. They haven't thought of a mechanism. Things like professional tax. Property tax is still going to be the mandate of the municipality, which is the dominant amount of money that you get as revenue. But what happens when property tax also goes into the TIF? And what happens when the SPV, as it is constituted, as Ashwati was talking about now, it has a lot of government players right now, but that could be changed. What happens when TIFs come to India? There is a lot of talk about TIFs already. So the reason why financing is important is because finance capital has a certain logic to it. And it is often focused on small areas which are already relatively better off, because that's where they can make money from. When you introduce a model like that through the Smart City mission, which is what the area-based development kind of does, of course, there is a lot of government control still. Of course, the amount of private involvement in SPVs in India is still small. And of course, when TIFs come to India, probably we will adopt a completely different model, which will be more equitable. But what if we don't, right? And the point of talking about it and trying to raise these questions is to kind of remain vigilant, because there are certain pitfalls to this model of financing cities, which could actually create zones of high inequity. And if there is any, this will also kind of offer a segue to the conclusion, which is we think there are certain consequences to democracy, to local democracy. Because this is a global conversation now about what inequality does to democracy. Can it corrupt democracy, about the kind of results that you can get from a democratic process when there is high inequality? And there are serious problems that could happen. It may not happen, of course. But the point of us raising these questions is, will we avoid the mistakes that other cities have made?
I think you're saying this in a beautifully understated way. NDMC is already very elite and super elite. Now it will become super elite.
Right.
Till finally the conclusion is that only a few people who are like the big developers or whatever industrialists will actually garner all the money. That's where it's going, right? So why not say it like it is?
Well, because we are trying to just go by the evidence that we have at the moment. So unless we have better evidence, we don't want to say that.
This looks very convincing.
Just for cities like NDMC, which were, the components of the city that were chosen, in the beginning we were talking about forms that the municipalities had to send to the state governments. So of the municipal bodies in Delhi, NDMC clearly does better in terms of your budgetary, the financial health of that municipality. So it's also, and I'm not saying that it's just to take the NDMC area, but it's also been chosen because it does take on like 3% of the area and has very high revenues. So why we also broke it down into these kind of numbers and try to understand is try and understand where we can, where there is rationale to it, to try and sort of also perhaps in the future give recommendations and hold people accountable, because even if within transportation there is quite a bit for pedestrian transportation, there are components for affordable housing, this data can be used for something like that. The affordable, and maybe we'll come to that, maybe we can keep these questions for the conclusion, but maybe...
No, I just wanted to say one thing, which is the Smart Cities mission does one good thing probably, it does allow you to change the guidelines and the structure of the scheme as it goes along based on what they learn. So the point is also to try and probably influence the government and change it if you don't like certain things in it. So we'll just move on to like a short, brief literature review of what we did, and then we'll move on to conclusions.
Can we hold the questions to the end, because we're actually quite over our 45 minutes. We just finished.
So I mean, you just saw what this Indian smart city looks like, but or what the mission says an Indian smart city would look like in the next coming 5 years and later. But what we did before that, as Persis was asking, the first question was, what is a smart city? So we were trying to look at the global discourse and trying to understand what do they talk about. And the words that, as you people mentioned, was the ICT-driven, competitive, entrepreneurial, big data-centric development and urban entities are what smart cities are. And they're networked, they're wired cities. But neither in India but globally also, you actually could not agree that this is a definition. You could only look at cases where this is worked out to create cities probably which they claim are equitable, sustainable in some ways. So I would just say that neither in India or globally is there anywhere an agreed definition of a smart city. What they say you could have is some form of technological, organizational, policy innovation which would develop a city in a physical, social, with social infrastructures for economic development, regeneration, social cohesion, and improved city administration. But so what the smart city mission says is, through the LSE Bloomberg report that they gave out in 2017, says that the Indian smart cities adapted and refined even this to saying that you create your own, as Ajay was just saying, you just create your own, you contextualize it based on each city, what you want. As Persis was saying, what an average ICT component across projects is just 19%. The majority, they capped it at 25%. They said not more than 25% should you actually focus on ICT. They wanted basic infrastructure in their projects. They wanted energy. They wanted capacity building as part of the project. They did not want you to focus on what you hear are smart cities. They actually had strong emphasis on area-based development, citizen preferences, which they tried to record, and basic services.
So, I mean, I'm going to conclude very, very quickly to open the floor to questions. But just to sort of recap, what we tried to put forth was an empirical understanding. So, how were the smart cities chosen? What was the selection process? What were the rounds? What are the kind of projects that have got significance? Where is the financing coming from? And what is the governance structure of this to whatever degree we have? Because the SPVs have just been formed. We haven't yet seen them being, we don't have data yet on project implementation. So just this kind of a background, we then move to this idea of, can they be lighthouses of change? And sort of keeping the information that we have in mind, we ask the sort of questions, like in this present form that the SPV stands at. It is ambiguous in terms of who's going to control it, how much control they'll have, and over a period of time, how will the sort of relationship between the municipality and the SPV stand? So, does this seem to be a space where you could have deep democracy if one component which is implementing a large part of the projects in the city and is a very large part of the budget, does not have a very strong elected representative? And how is this a movement away from the 74th Amendment? Can the financial models be replicated and ensure that access to services and spaces is inclusive? And so we come back to those sort of key words that were there. It should be a lighthouse. There should be inclusive development. It should be financially sustainable. It should be ecologically sustainable. So given that the budgets are significant, can we allow for it to be done across the city so that you don't have sort of a space which is not a gated society but sort of has greater access to services from a more public budget? And can that be replicated across the city? So if 3% of a city is getting about 1,700 odd crore, can 100% of the city have that kind of a proportion? Can we financially support that? And if we can't support that, can it be a lighthouse for change? And the forms of citizen engagement. So if a large part of the legitimization is happening on the basis that this is what the people want water to be improved in this way, and meters are important, and flyovers are important, etc. But which part of the city did you talk to? And whom did you talk to? And there isn't much documentation on the process of it. You told me that there is Natak Nukkad, which went into a slum area, but I don't know what the people over there said. That there is affordable housing is interesting, that there's in-situ resettlement is interesting, but there's also a lot of displacement when in-situ resettlement happens. So what do you do with those structures? Riverfront projects themselves have a lot of displacement. There are components within the Smart City Mission which are just called slum eviction. That's what the project title is. So there are questions. We're not saying that the Smart City Mission is the best or the worst of ideas. It is an interesting platform. It does change, like between the rounds, the kinds of selection process have changed. There is a way to negotiate with the state, and so we feel that it would be interesting to talk about it in a more sort of holistic manner and in a more empirical manner.